Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today, we're going to be diving into a pretty provocative piece, actually. And it's titled The West's Neo-Colonial Strategy, How Aid is Used to Control Africa. You know, we always hear about international aid as like, a good thing, but this article really kind of challenges that narrative.
Yeah.
And presents a perspective that's, pretty unsettling.
Yeah, it really flips the script, on that whole like Africa needs our help narrative. The author is arguing that rather than being altruistic, Western aid is really a tool to maintain control, like over economies, over politics, over resources, you name it.
Okay, so we're talking about neo-colonialism, right? But how does it actually work? I mean, African countries are independent, so how can there still be this kind of control,
Yeah, it's subtle, but it's there.
Yeah.
Just think about it for a second. Western nations a lot of times attach conditions to their aid packages.
Okay.
So imagine a scenario where a country needs financial assistance. Yeah. They're offered aid, but strings attached. They might be pressured to adopt certain economic policies or open their markets up to foreign companies or even align their foreign policy with the donor country.
So it's like you get the aid, but you have to play by their rules.
Exactly.
Right.
And the rules often benefit Western interests more than the recipient country.
Right.
Take debt traps, for instance.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
A country might receive loans that they can't realistically repay, and that leads to, a cycle of dependence. Or they might be forced to privatize key industries, giving Western corporations control over, those essential resources.
The article mentions controlling the narrative, too.
Yeah.
And that really struck me because it's not something we typically think about.
Right.
But how does that play into neo-colonialism?
Well, it's all about shaping perceptions. Western nations often dominate, international media, and they have a really powerful influence on how events in Africa are portrayed. They get to define who's a good guy and who's a bad guy, which can impact everything from foreign investment to international interventions.
So it's not just about economic or political control.
Right.
It's about controlling the story itself.
Yeah, think about it. If a leader resists Western influence, they might be labeled a dictator or a threat to stability.
Right.
Even if they have legitimate grievances, or are advocating for their country's interests.
Yeah.
This narrative then justifies actions against them. Whether it's sanctions or isolation or even military intervention.
It's kind of scary how easily narratives can be manipulated. The article brings up Patrice Lumumba and Thomas Sankara
Yes.
as examples of this, right?
Yeah.
These were leaders who challenged the status quo and ultimately met tragic ends.
Yeah. The author argues that this pattern of undermining independent African leaders who prioritize their nation's sovereignty is consistent throughout history. Both Lumumba and Sankara had visions for their countries that didn't align with Western interests.
Right.
And they were ultimately removed from power. Whether their downfalls were directly orchestrated by Western powers is debatable.
Right.
But the narrative surrounding them was certainly shaped in a way that benefited those who sought to maintain control.
It makes you question everything you thought you knew, right?
Right.
How much of what we hear about Africa is actually just a carefully constructed narrative designed to serve someone else's agenda.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's
a lot to unpack.
It is a lot to unpack.
Yeah, it is a lot to unpack. But the article doesn't just, lay out the problems.
Right.
It actually offers some solutions, right?
Right.
What can African nations do to break free from this cycle of neo-colonialism?
Well, the author argues that, true change has to come from within. It's about reclaiming control and charting a new path.
Okay, but how do they actually do that?
Well, one key point is, investing in their own industries and reducing reliance on foreign aid. The author suggests focusing on things like education and infrastructure and supporting local entrepreneurship.
So instead of accepting aid with all those strings attached,
Right.
they build up their own economies from the ground up.
Exactly. It's about, fostering self-reliance and creating a more sustainable model for development. The article also highlights the importance of fair trade agreements.
Okay.
Instead of being forced to accept deals that benefit Western corporations, African nations can demand equitable partnerships that allow them to benefit from their own resources.
That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
What else does the author suggest?
Strengthening regional unity is another important point.
Okay.
By working together, African nations can have a stronger voice on the global stage and push back against external pressures more effectively.
It's like the old saying, strength in numbers, right?
Precisely. And finally, the article emphasizes the importance of controlling their own narratives.
Okay.
This means, investing in their own media and communication channels, supporting African storytellers and artists, and challenging those often, negative and distorted portrayals that dominate Western media.
So it's about taking control of the story.
Right.
And presenting a more authentic and nuanced perspective.
Exactly. It's about showcasing the diversity and resilience and potential of Africa.
Yeah.
And letting African voices be heard on their own terms.
So the solutions are like multifaceted. It's not just about economics or politics. It's about culture and perception too.
Right.
But what about the global impact?
Yeah.
I mean, how does neo-colonialism affect the rest of the world?
Well, the author argues that it's not just a problem for Africa, it's a global issue. By keeping African nations trapped in a cycle of dependence,
Right.
neo-colonialism prevents them from reaching their full potential. And when a continent with so much talent and resources is held back, it limits global trade, innovation, and ultimately human progress.
So everyone loses out in the end.
Think about it. What if those resources and talent were fully unleashed?
Yeah.
What kind of advancements could we see in science and technology and art and culture? The potential is enormous.
Right.
But it's being stifled by these outdated power structures.
This has been an eye-opening conversation.
Yeah.
It's made me realize how much I've just accepted certain narratives about Africa without questioning them.
That's the thing about neo-colonialism. It's often so subtle and pervasive
Right.
that we don't even realize it's happening.
Yeah.
But once you start to see it,
Yeah.
you can't unsee it. And it's up to us to challenge those narratives and push for a more just and equitable world.
Yeah, it's definitely made me want to learn more and figure out what I can do to make a difference.
Right.
Speaking of the article touches on the role of individuals.
Yeah.
What can we as ordinary people do to challenge neocolonialism?
Well, the author stresses that awareness is key. We need to educate ourselves and others about these issues. It's about seeking out diverse perspectives, especially those of African scholars and activists, and, questioning the narratives that we've been fed.
So step one is getting informed, but what comes after that? I mean, how can we move beyond just awareness and into action?
Well, there are actually a lot of ways to get involved. Supporting organizations working to promote sustainable development in Africa is a great place to start. Look for groups that are truly community-driven and focus on empowering local people.
I imagine there are also organizations working to challenge those unfair trade deals we were talking about earlier.
Absolutely. There are groups advocating for fair trade policies that benefit both producers and consumers.
Yeah.
Supporting those efforts can make a real difference. And if we don't underestimate the power of simple conversations,
Yeah.
talking to friends and family about these issues, raising awareness and challenging misconceptions can have a ripple effect.
It's about using our voices and our choices to push for change, even in small ways.
Think about where you spend your money.
Okay.
Supporting businesses that practice ethical sourcing and prioritize fair labor practices is another way to make an impact. Even something as simple as choosing fair trade coffee or chocolate can be a small act of resistance.
These are all great ideas. It's about being conscious consumers and citizens.
Yeah.
And using our collective power to make a difference.
The author also encourages people to engage with African art and culture.
Okay.
By supporting African artists and musicians and filmmakers and writers, we can help amplify their voices and challenge the dominant narratives.
It's about celebrating the richness and diversity of African culture and recognizing the talent and creativity that exists there.
Exactly. And remember, solidarity is key. Connect with and support African activists and organizations working on the ground. Amplify their voices, share their stories, and stand with them in their fight for justice and equality.
This deep dive has been a powerful reminder that we're all connected and that the fight for justice in Africa is a fight for a better world for everyone.
Yeah, the author leaves us with a call to action, a challenge to not just be aware of neocolonialism, but to actively challenge it, to use our voices, our choices, and our influence to create a more just and equitable world. It's a vision worth fighting for.
Absolutely. This conversation has been incredibly thought-provoking and inspiring. For those of you listening, I hope this has sparked your curiosity and given you some ideas about how to get involved. Keep learning, keep questioning, and keep pushing for change.
Remember, even small actions can have a big impact when we work together.
That's a great note to end on. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. Until next time, keep diving.